XAML stands for the Extensible Application Markup Language, and XAML represents the backbone of the entire Windows Presentation Foundation. It's really simply an XML file that describes all of the elements on a scene, as well as some information about the scene itself. On the artboard, I'm looking at the design view, but at the top right I can switch over to the XAML view and see the specific XAML for my document. You'll see the 3 rectangles that I've created, their fill, their stroke, and so on. Most of the properties that you'll need to create and modify you can do in the design board, but sometimes if you need to set specific properties, you can also do that in the XAML document here. Modifications made in the XAML document are changed immediately on the artboard. So for instance, if I were to change a value, I can switch back to the design board, and you'll immediately see that that rectangle takes on the new value I had just set. At this point, let's look a little bit more at what our project contains. Over in the Files Inspector, you'll see Untitled Project 10. Now, you probably have Untitled Project 1, but since I've been working with the tool for a little while, that number will continue to increment with each project that I create using the default name. Underneath the Untitled Project is a folder of my references, which these are the Dynamic Linked Libraries, or DLLs, that are necessary to build my project. Presentation Core and Presentation Framework, these 2 libraries define the Windows Presentation Foundation and allow you to use those controls. System and SystemXML.dll are the basic .NET Framework controls that allow you to actually make an XML or XAML document, as well as some basic code behind. Windows-based.dll is the final library, and this contains some of the interactions between your application and the Windows operating system itself. App.xaml is always created for you, and this contains all of your application-level resources. We'll talk about resources later on, but when you define a resource at the application level, all of your windows inside your project will have access to those resources. Those resources are stored in this file. The assemblyinfo.cs, this file contains the specific data necessary for the .NET Framework to convert your XAML document and all of your code behind into an actual executable that somebody else can use. In most cases, you won't need to modify this file at all. Finally, you have window1.xaml, which is created for you by default when you create an application. The small asterisk at the end of it indicates that my project is currently not saved, and when I click on the arrow, the window1.xaml.cs is displayed. If when you created the project, you created as a Visual Basic project, you would see window1.xaml.vb here, and this document contains all of the code behind for your window. Code behind is just a special way of saying the .NET Framework code that your window and your application can use to extend the functionality. There is built-in functionality into the Windows Presentation Foundation for simple interactions like starting and stopping animations with mouse movements, but as you move forward, you can create additional code in your code behind documents to allow you to have more sophisticated behavior. If you're curious about what potential you have here, the Blend application itself was created in Blend. In the beginning, as the XAML was created, it was created in Notepad. As the application matured, they were actually able to create the interface for Blend itself inside the application. Then all of the functionality, like creating projects and working with the timeline, were created in Code Behind and a linked engine. I can add additional files to my project by right-clicking on the project and either adding a new item, adding an existing item, or linking to an existing item. When I select Add Existing Item, for instance, I can choose an asset from my project file, and the file is added to my Files Inspector. Now when I double-click on that file, it's inserted into my scene. I can also right-click any of the files in my File Inspector and choose Edit Externally, which will cause an external application, in this case Microsoft's Paint, to come up and allow me to edit the file. As you work with your code behind, and as you work with the scripts behind your projects, one of the things that you'll find that you need to do is right-click on the project and edit it externally. When you do this, Visual Studio will come up, and by default it'll complain about a security warning, but that's normal when you're working on projects from Microsoft Blend. You want to load the project normally and say OK. Now your project has been loaded into Visual Studio, and when you expand the Window1.xaml to find your Window1.xaml.cs, you can double-click that and make the modifications to your code directly. I'm now going to Alt-Tab back to Expression Blend, since that's where I'm going to be continuing to do most of my work. Underneath the Files Inspector is the Data Inspector, where we can work with data like XML data sources and CLR data sources. We'll talk more about that later on when we get into working with data binding.